There are wounds that do not scream. They crack silently, like wind eroding an old cliff, wearing it down grain by grain. A devoted mother, after decades of sacrifice, suddenly becomes a stranger to the very child she raised. The child doesn't lash out with cruel words, but neither do they call. It is not hatred that drives the distance, but a deliberate withdrawal, as if she represents a memory too painful to face. According to Jung, when a grown child becomes estranged from their mother, it is rarely just a personal conflict. More often, it signals an incomplete psychological separation. In the process of individuation, the journey of becoming one's true self, a child must distance themselves from the mother archetype, not just socially, but in the depths of the unconscious. But if this separation is fueled by anger, unconscious impulses, or tangled in idealized or wounded images, it leaves behind unresolved psychic fractures. The mother symbolizes more than a person. She is the collective emblem of nurturance, the great mother archetype. Yet when the child cannot integrate this archetype in a healthy way, she also transforms into the dark mother of the unconscious, the controller, the devourer, the force that stifles freedom. At this level, the distance is no longer about communication. It reflects a psychological conflict between unreconciled parts of the psyche, between the persona, the mask one shows the world, and the shadow, the hidden resentment, guilt, and fear of being consumed. The more the son strives to become a man by societal standards, independent, rational, strong, the more his anima is suppressed. And in many cases, this anima, the repressed feminine within, bears the face of his mother. He does not retreat from her because he hates her. He retreats because she reminds him of a vulnerability he has not yet learned to accept. Not all love is liberating. Some forms of love, though born of sincere devotion, unconsciously turn into chains. For many mothers, giving everything to their child is not a conscious attempt to control. Yet in the unconscious mind of a son who is forging his identity, such overwhelming presence may become a psychic force that swallows individuality. And in the depths of his being, the child begins to resist, not the mother herself, but what she represents. Jung calls this phenomenon undifferentiated attachment. When there is no clear boundary between love and possession, between nurturing and engulfing, between care and psychological fusion, the ego of the child cannot develop freely. To liberate himself from the image of the ideal mother, the son must enter a process of psychic separation. But when this process remains unconscious, it erupts as withdrawal, abrupt, cold, and haunted. The mother, meanwhile, is left in confusion. She is still herself, loving, devoted, always ready to listen. But what she doesn't realize is that, in the son's inner world, she has become a symbol of an outdated psychological framework, something he must leave behind to grow into a new phase of life. In Jung's system, every archetype carries both light and shadow. The mother archetype embodies both nurturing power and the risk of psychic absorption. When the dark mother dominates, when love is boundaryless, sacrifice becomes total, and the mother's ego dissolves into her role, the child begins to suffocate. Ironically, the more she loves, the more he withdraws. This does not happen because she has done something wrong. It happens because the child has not yet developed an ego strong enough to receive that love without feeling invaded. When the anima remains unintegrated, repressed emotions find their exit through oppositional reactions: indifference, sarcasm, avoidance, or long silences. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In this case, the child's indifference is not a decision, it is a symptom, a sign of an unconscious shadow, unprocessed emotions stuck within an idealized image, with no clear path of escape. On the other side, the mother too carries her own unconscious darkness. When her child creates distance, she doesn't just lose a relationship, she loses a part of her identity, for she has so deeply merged herself with the role of mother that when she is no longer needed, she feels as though she no longer exists. From that pain, she tries harder, calls, texts, sends advice, love, and longing. But through the lens of the son's unconscious, these gestures become invasions. This is where the vicious cycle begins. The more she reaches out, the more he withdraws. The quieter she becomes, the more invisible she feels. It is no longer just a story between two individuals. It is a clash between two unintegrated parts of the soul, the fear of abandonment and the fear of being devoured. Each of us carries a shadow, the rejected part of the self, the hidden truths, the aspects we refuse to see in the mirror. Jung defined the shadow not as evil, but as all that remains unconscious. And in the mother-son dynamic, the shadow often appears early, yet rarely gets named. The son grows up in love, but also in an atmosphere thick with sacrifice, expectation, and unspoken hopes. These may never be verbalized, but they seep into his breath, his skin, his gaze. And if he lacks the inner boundaries to separate his feelings, he will slowly push the conflicting ones, anger, guilt, disappointment, into shadow. There a new image forms, the shadow mother. No longer the real woman, but a distorted reflection she carries in his mind, the one who demands too much, who makes him feel insufficient, who touches the oldest wound, the sense of never truly being himself. From this, a phenomenon emerges that Jung called unconscious identification. The son cannot separate what he feels toward his mother from what he feels toward himself or his past. A wound from an absent father, an early emotional scar, a rejection, any of these may become projected onto the mother. Not because she caused them, but because she is the closest container. He doesn't resent her. He resents the unresolved emotions she unknowingly awakens within him. This leads to projection. The son casts onto his mother all the feelings he has yet to digest. Disappointment from failed relationships, dissatisfaction with himself, the shame of societal failure. She becomes the mirror he wants to shatter, not because she is wrong, but because he has not yet learned to see himself clearly through her. From the mother's side, a parallel mechanism unfolds. She may have unconsciously merged her identity with the role of the redeemer, believing her love for her child is pure, unconditional, and impossible to misinterpret. But this belief blinds her to a fundamental truth of psychology. Even the most beautiful love, if lacking boundaries, can become a burden. And when the child withdraws, she feels betrayed. Instead of facing this shift in role as a necessary stage of growth, she clings to the bond by continuing to give advice, attention, messages. She does not realize that in the unconscious of the son, she is reinforcing the image of the invading mother, the very figure he is trying to escape. Jung once warned, "We are possessed by images we cannot make conscious." In the silence between mother and child, it is these unconscious images that speak for them. Every silence becomes an unspoken protest. Every avoided gaze, a scream that was never heard. Both suffer. The mother in the pain of being left behind. The child in the suffocation of something unnamed. And yet, paradoxically, they are not betraying each other. They are reacting to shadows that were never brought into dialogue. There is a kind of loneliness that does not stem from external circumstances, but from inner experience. A solitude that arises when one detaches from everything that once defined the self. It is the existential loneliness, an inevitable part of the individuation journey, which Jung described as the process of becoming who you are meant to be. When the son enters adulthood, he leaves not only the physical home, he also departs from the inner image of the mother, the protector, the nurturer, the sole emotional refuge. But this departure is rarely gentle. More often, it erupts as a rupture, a severance marked by inner turmoil. On this journey, the mother is not just a person. She becomes a symbol of the old self, the part of the psyche that must be left behind for the child to be reborn as an autonomous soul. He must symbolically kill the inner image of the mother, not out of hatred, but as an act of liberation. Jung called this the symbolic death. To enter the world as a free man, the son must die to his identity as a dependent child. But if the mother refuses to let this happen, through anxiety, over-involvement, or denial of change, this symbolic death becomes impossible. The son then lives in limbo, not quite a child, but not yet a man. And by a kind of spiritual law, when a bond is not allowed to die its natural death, it begins to decay. The son's withdrawal is not a rejection of love, it is an unconscious attempt to protect his fragile ego. He does not wish to hurt his mother, but the closer he is to her, the more he feels small, inadequate, dependent. So he walks away, not as an act of will, but as a survival response. On the mother's side, this retreat awakens a primordial fear, the fear of becoming invisible. When the child no longer needs her, she feels as though part of her being is erased, not because she is selfish, but because for too long she has defined herself through motherhood. And now, as that role fades, she falls into an existential void, a place where no one names her presence anymore. This results in a double tragedy. The son suffers because he cannot detach in a healthy way. The mother suffers because she cannot let go consciously. And in between them lies an extended silence, not an act of denial, but a transitional phase in a spiritual process not yet complete. Jung once wrote, "Individuation is not the process of becoming perfect, but of becoming whole. And to become whole, the son must learn to return, not as a boy needing protection, but as a mature soul capable of seeing the mother no longer as a symbol, but as a human being. Likewise, the mother must learn how to exist without being needed, not out of indifference, but because she has completed the sacred journey of motherhood and now has the right to step into a new chapter of her own, one of existence beyond the role. No one grows without walking through shadow, but as Jung emphasized, the shadow does not need to be destroyed. It must be seen, recognized, and integrated. When the son becomes courageous enough to look at the image of the mother within, not as a devouring force, but as a human figure with wounds, limits, and unspoken love, something extraordinary can occur. Reconnection. Reconciliation, in Jungian terms, does not begin outside. It begins within, from the acceptance that the mother is no longer a past to be rejected, but a part of the psyche that helps shape one's identity. The relationship with the mother, in its deepest meaning, is the relationship with the anima, the soft, intuitive, emotional part of the self that is often repressed in boys raised in a competitive, rational world. Only when the son no longer sees tenderness as weakness, vulnerability as shame, can he see his mother without shrinking. Only then can he return, not as a guilty child seeking forgiveness, but as an adult carrying understanding. On the mother's side, reconciliation comes when she lets go of the illusion that she must remain at the center of her child's life. Jung called this the death of the role, a ritual ending that allows for a rebirth into a new identity. The quiet companion. No longer expecting, no longer controlling, no longer wounded by being unnecessary, only offering a love that is unconditional, but no longer dependent. And at the meeting point of these two inner journeys, a new connection is born. No longer bound by the unconscious contract of sacrifice and guilt, no longer tethered to the roles of nurturer and dependent, but a mature, free bond capable of saying, "I do not need you to survive, but I choose you to walk with me." When that happens, every encounter is no longer a battlefield of old wounds, but becomes a ritual of mutual recognition. Each glance is no longer a silent accusation, but an acknowledgement. We have both walked through darkness, each in our own way, and yet we are still able to meet again, not as enemies, but as souls marked by scars, no longer running from them. Reconciliation is not the erasure of memory. It is the ability to stand within memory without being ruled by it. It is hearing your mother's voice without feeling manipulated, holding your son without fearing rejection. It is being able to say to each other, "You were not perfect, nor was I, but perhaps we still have the chance to love, not as we once did, but as we are now." Love does not vanish in prolonged silence. It does not dissolve when calls go unanswered. It merely retreats, waiting for a new form, a form Jung called mature love. No longer fusion, but coexistence in conscious presence. The mother, after everything, is no longer a symbol of endless sacrifice, but a human being with limits, with her own story, with the right to be vulnerable without losing dignity. The son, after everything, is no longer a boy who ran away from being consumed, but a man who understands he need not reject tenderness to prove his strength. Jung once said, "We change only when we become conscious of ourselves as we are." And perhaps when both mother and son pause long enough to witness the shadow they have cast upon each other, something profound begins to stir. Compassion, not grand forgiveness, not a dramatic reunion, just a quiet moment where the son can sit beside his mother, no longer afraid, no longer indebted, where the mother can look at her son without hoping he'll return as he once was, only grateful that he is present as he is. Love, when it has passed through the unconscious, through wounds, through shadow, becomes silent. It asks for nothing. It demands no proof. It no longer needs closeness to exist. It becomes like bedrock, subtle, enduring, quietly miraculous. And perhaps the greatest gift a mother can offer her estranged child is not to hold on, but to step back, with light in her heart. No longer the waiting harbor, but the distant lighthouse. The one who illuminates, not to keep, but to help him find his way, should the day come when his heart is wide enough to return. Not with guilt, but with freedom. And the son, when he has traveled far enough, when old symbols no longer threaten his still-forming ego, may one day realize what he was running from wasn't his mother, but an unnamed part of his own soul. That is the moment when no apology is needed, no justification, only something raw, profoundly human. "I'm home." As Jung once wrote, "Love begins where possession ends."